Okay, let me try to fix it somewhere so I don't have to carry it. Wait.
You're hearing. Hi guys,
Yeah.
this is Astrid Traveling. We're with Eric from, you're in Hong Kong right now, right?
Yes, I am. Yeah. Hello, Astrid.
Yay! So we usually speak French, but we're making an effort because this is for the English crowd out there.
Yeah.
It's good to see you. I love the books in the background.
Yes, it is my study, actually. My son's room when he's in Hong Kong, and my study when he's away. But he's away, so he's currently in Hong Kong, so I borrow his room for a while to work. Yeah.
Nice. So we met many years ago in France. How did you end up in Hong Kong? How did you end up working in Asia?
Well, I decided to, when I got my O level, I decided to learn Chinese. It was back in the mid-80s. And then I furthered my study in Taiwan. Then I worked in Singapore as an intern. And then I was sent by a company to Beijing in '93. I stayed there over 3 years. And then I moved to Shanghai after a few months in Paris, where we got our son delivered. Then Shanghai, I lived part-time in Shanghai, and then my wife was relocated to Hong Kong in 2006. So since then, I've been commuting between Shanghai and Hong Kong, and I'm currently in Hong Kong trying to fly back to Shanghai. But you know, the borders are pretty closed these days. So my wife is in Shanghai. My son is back from Canada. So I'm actually with him for a couple of weeks. And eventually I will fly back to Shanghai at the end of this month, so early next month. Yeah.
So it's interesting because I am not well versed in the Asian culture at all. And I'd love, your support with this, because I mean, I just don't know anything much apart from what we learn in history books in the Western world, which, and some of the books, I mean, I did read a trilogy on the dynasty, one of the dynasties in China, which was really, really interesting. It was more focused though on the role of the changing, the development of the roles of women in Asia, in China. So that was interesting. But and I do have a cousin who travels a lot to China. Where does he go? Tibet, Mongolia. So he's told me a few stories too. How would you, like, if someone would say, because you have Tibet, which is, you a very deep cultural country or state, and you have China, which is huge, humongous country. And then you have the story of Hong Kong, which was once Chinese and then became British and then went back to China again. And all these different cultures. I mean, Japan is incredibly different. How would you define the culture in Hong Kong particularly?
Well, Hong Kong is basically Chinese. It's been Chinese forever, with the exception about 136 years, I think, when it was given to the British when China lost the Opium War. So I think it was in 1842 and the years after. So Hong Kong Island was actually granted to the crown of Great Britain forever, and parts of the Kowloon Peninsula also, and the rest was leased for 99 years. And back in the early 80s, Margaret Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping, they talk about how to fix that issue. And finally, the UK decided to give back all the territory to China because it was not livable just to keep the Hong Kong Island and part of the Kowloon Peninsula to the British Crown. So, but the population is 95% Chinese here. So you have, of course, tiny minorities. There's a lot of mates from the Philippines and Indonesia, and of course, Caucasian people, and also minority from India, Pakistan, Nepal, or former British colonies. But the vast majority of the population is ethnically Chinese. They speak Cantonese because most of them come from Guangdong province, which border China, Hong Kong. But a lot of them came to Hong Kong also wave after waves of migrations following the turmoil of China's history, and especially during the Cultural Revolution from 1966, or slightly before, when the Communist Party of China kicked out the Kuomintang that took refuge in Taiwan in the late 40s. And waves of people came from northern part of China, especially from Shanghai, from Ningbo, from Hangzhou, from Shandong province. So they mingle with the local population and they learn Cantonese. So the huge majority of Hong Kong people do not even speak Mandarin, especially the older generation. But now it's compulsory to learn it at school. And actually, it's quite because Hong Kong has been, it's part of China. So, and China has lots of different languages, but they have a lingua franca, which is Mandarin. It's actually a dialect from the northern part of China. That's what you learn at school if you want to learn Mandarin Chinese. And Cantonese is a dialect that is widely spoken. It's spoken by, I think, around 100 million of people on the planet. Shanghainese is another dialect. There's lots of dialects in China, and lots of, you're in the USA, so most of the Chinese immigrants or coming from China in the USA, most of them, the early stage, the early wave, they come from the south of China, and the later stage came from a bit everywhere. But most of them do speak Mandarin, especially the younger generation. So,
Really interesting. And is it true that Hong Kong is like the financial, the financial place of the financial center for China now, or is it just historically an incredible trade city, and the finances there and the technology there are particularly advanced compared to the rest of China?
Actually, Hong Kong is the most important financial center in Asia, and I think it ranks number 3 globally. I think the number 1 is London, the second one is New York City, and Hong Kong is a close third. Hong Kong benefited from the fact that China was close to the world till the late 70s, when Deng Xiaoping decided to launch the forced modernizations and open up the country to foreign capital, technology, and human resources. So his strategy was to use overseas Chinese communities, starting from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and some others from Southeast Asia, and also the overseas Chinese community from the USA, from Europe, from Australia, Canada, and so on, to invest. And they formed the first wave of investment, and later other countries came in to invest as well, because China was in a very tough situation back in the 70s. So they had gone through the Cultural Revolution that causes millions of deaths, and despair here. So they had to really open up. And so Hong Kong was a kind of an entrepot for China. So people trading with China back then could not be based in China. So everything went through Hong Kong. That helped a lot of local people to get very rich using connections. And so Hong Kong became one of the biggest harbors globally. Now it's only ranked number 8 because Hong Kong has been replaced by other Chinese harbors such as Shanghai or Shenzhen. But still a very important place. And financially, for global finance, of course, there's a lot of operations in Hong Kong for Chinese companies looking for overseas capitals or looking for IPOs and all these financial operations. And also nowadays with the rivalry between the USA and China, Hong Kong has a very important role for Chinese companies because some of them are delisting from the New York Stock Exchange, so they are relisting in Hong Kong. So Hong Kong is a very important place because it's like a territory that is in between China and the rest of the world, and the rule of law is here. Well, you've heard there's a new regulation that is going to be already implemented, that will control the way people criticize the government. Well, I don't want to dwell on that issue because it's a bit political and is not the subject of our discussion. But Hong Kong is still a very important place globally. And it's also, within 5 hours from flying out from Hong Kong, you can reach probably almost the 2/3 of the global population. Not only China, but also India, Indonesia are less than 5 hours away from here by plane. So it's really an interesting place. And yeah, it's a Chinese place, but quite different from the mainland of China.
International mindset.
Yes.
Interesting. Are people in Hong Kong? Do people act differently than if they were in Shanghai, for example, or is there a specific cultural, social culture of Hong Kong? Are they interested in green energy? I understand that they're very focused these days on, relisting their companies in Hong Kong, but also AI development and high-tech development for, AI purposes. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, a little bit actually. I study at the Polytechnic University of Hong Kong on leadership innovation, so I know a little bit what's going on here. What I can tell you, actually, Hong Kong is not that innovative compared with other cities, especially Shenzhen. Shenzhen is the mainland Chinese city bordering Hong Kong. It's a city that went from 40,000 inhabitants in the late 70s to about 15 million people today. And people coming from all over China, meaning that it's the most innovative city, not only economically, but also socially, because you have lots of people coming from everywhere in China without their family, like the young men and women, free from the family pressure and establishing themselves in Shenzhen. So it's a very, very interesting city. Yeah. And that's where you have lots of very famous Chinese companies that actually set up roots in Shenzhen, where we're talking a lot about Huawei these days, but ZTE, Tencent, and lots of these very high-tech oriented companies are in Shenzhen. BYD is actually Tesla, probably Tesla main competitor. And for example, you know, I think most or nearly all the taxi cars in Shenzhen are powered by electricity.
Oh, wow.
It's impressive. And a lot of companies, I mean, a lot of people are buying electric cars. So, I mean, the electric car in China's market is developing at a very high pace. It slowed down a little bit lately because the government stopped giving incentives to people for purchasing an electric car. But I don't have the figures, but I can tell you it's becoming bigger and bigger, especially in the south. So yes, it's a very innovative place. Hong Kong is quite different. I think Hong Kong at some point were too spoiled by history. So people became a bit complacent because it was too easy here for many local people to do business and generate high revenues. The tax rate in Hong Kong is very low. It's about 16.5%, you know. So it's pretty low compared to lots of countries. They didn't really invest in technology. Now they're trying to catch up, but it's going to be very difficult for them to catch up with Shenzhen, because Shenzhen is just, I mean, it's just a stone's throw away, and they are very innovative. So Hong Kong has been focusing on its development on trading, on finance, real estate. I mean, Hong Kong is the most expensive city if you want to buy a property globally.
Oh,
really? Yeah. And by far. And I think the second one is probably Singapore, with Paris a distant third, and then you have so it's very expensive to buy a property here. While to live, I mean, for the living cost of living is not that high. If you go to the wet markets, for example, to buy food, is quite cheap. But
why do they call it? I'm sorry to interrupt. Why do they call it a wet market?
Because it's a market where you can find everything, you know, meat, fish, fruits, vegetables. And I think they're cleaning after the day, you know, they clean it with water. That's why it becomes wet. It could be one of the explanation. The other one meaning that wet probably means fresh. So you can find fresh food there. So we go to the wet market. We go to the supermarket also to buy some stuff. But for fresh products, you better go to the wet market, and the price are way cheaper than if you were to go to a supermarket. So, and it's very lively. I mean, you have to speak a little bit of Cantonese, but you know, just to count and. But it's very funny. It's a very good experience if you go to Hong Kong to visit wet markets.
I would absolutely love to. What kind of food? What's your preferred food over there? What would you suggest?
Well, actually, the Cantonese food is a very delicate food, one of the best in China. In China, you have lots of different cuisine. Cantonese food mostly rely on soup, fish, vegetables, a little bit of fruits, and some meat, but not that much, because the weather here is pretty hot and humid. So Cantonese cuisine is actually trying to relate food with medicine, meaning that depending on the type of weather, you have to eat some specific food. Like my wife is Cantonese, and she always tell me, you know, the weather is hot and humid, you better eat that. The weather is cold and humid, you better eat that type of food or whatever. So they really connect food with your body energy.
Wow,
Very interesting. And actually, people do not know that in terms of longevity, the place on earth where people live the longest is Hong Kong. It's
Oh,
not
Hong Kong.
even higher, even longer than in Japan. So both for men and women.
Yeah, I knew. I mean, I think I knew that it was in I really thought it was more inland, though. I didn't think it would be in an international hub like Hong Kong.
No. Hong Kong is I can say because I go hiking early in the morning. I usually go like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning with a headlamp, because you can hike. Hong Kong is a hiking paradise, and you can go hiking and then finish your hike in the sea, swimming,
Oh my
and
God.
I can see all these grandpas and grandmas, I talk to them sometimes. They are 70, 75, 80-year old, and they go swimming nearly every day of the week.
Oh my
And then
God.
you can
That's
understand
paradise.
why their longevity is so high. And Hong Kong also, people do not know, because people, when they think about Hong Kong, they are seeing, skyscrapers, tall buildings. It's true. Part of Hong Kong is a highly densified city where you have, a forest of skyscrapers, but that's only a tiny part of Hong Kong. Actually, about 2/3 of the Hong Kong territory is made out of forest and hills. So you can easily, if you're downtown Hong Kong, within 20 minutes by a ride of 20 minutes, you'll find yourself in the middle of the jungles, I would say,
Oh,
middle of the
really?
forest. Yes, it's
Is
one
it?
of the few places on earth where you can leave your office if you work in an office building, and within 20 minutes you find yourself in a forest. You can go hiking and then have a swim. It's fantastic lifestyle if you like it. So it's a local pastime to go hiking.
Are there
So
a
you can
lot
see
of
people.
people who live in the forest and commute in the city, or do they all prefer being?
There's a lot of people. Well, a lot of people. Some people live on the islands. You have a lot of outlying islands, so you can commute by ferry. Uh, some some people live near the forest, but a lot of people live downtown. It's really a question of lifestyle or revenues. Some people, they like to live in highly densified districts, and some other like to live, outside of these highly densified districts. So, but it's true, you have a concentration in some districts, is some of the highest population concentrated on Earth. It's
What
really,
about
really.
what about you mentioned that, and I find it fascinating that they relate health and food so closely together in their everyday life, every way of living. And actually, it's very hot here. I'm in Las Vegas. It's very, very hot, and I noticed that there was kind of des rides là qui apparaissent. So I have a friend who's back in California, and I asked her, what do your folks do? She's Asian. What do your folks do? Do you have any tips? And she says, well, there's, she gave me TikTok and Instagram, and she said, you can also use banana peels. So for any girls out there, try the banana peel. I'm going to try the banana peel. I'll see. I'll tell you if it works. But other than that, what about spirituality? Is it part of is it as much part of their culture? Is it hidden? Is it private? Do they have the huge, icons and statues? Do they experience that? Do they integrate it into their lives? Because I know that in martial arts, for instance, they really integrate the philosophies, you know, that they grow up with, and the faith practice within the martial arts, within the art of their defense and attack crafts. But what is it like in Hong Kong, if you're interested in knowing about how people live spiritually?
Well, there's actually spirituality is very important for people from southern China, especially from Hong Kong. You know, spirituality was attacked in China during the cultural revolutions, and even slightly before that period of time. But in Hong Kong, it was not. So they're actually more conservative than the mainlanders from China mainland. You have lots of temples here, you know, Buddhist temples, Taoist temples. You have churches also, a sheer share of Hong Kong people are Christians or Protestants. And you also have mosque. You also have Sikh temples. So you have actually places of worship for all kind of faiths.
Right.
Yeah, beliefs.
Have you
the Chinese
you've married a Cantonese gorgeous woman. She has her own faith. Is she Buddhist, or is she, what faith does she belong to?
Actually, she was born in mainland China, so during the time of the Cultural Revolution, so it was not it was forbidden to practice faith during that time. But you know, I mean, if you scratch the surface behind the Chinese face, I will say, you always find a mix of Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, and so they are quite connected, especially in the south of China, and Hong Kong is even deeper. They're really connected with their faith. It's a mix. The Chinese are very flexible. You know, they're not afraid of paradox. They like to integrate different practice. For example, you probably heard about the feng shui or feng shui in Mandarin. It means how to integrate the forces, you know, from the ground, the soil, from the wind, from the sun, from the moon, and so on, into the way you live. So especially here, you know, when you move to a new place, so especially when you buy a new place, you know, they will call a master to come in and do some cleaning of the place. Or if it's a new place, they also do it, but just to ward off the spirits, you know. So they will burn some candle. They would put some whatever fruits on display in a specific area, just to clean up the place. So it's quite interesting. Some people do not believe in it, but I think it's part of the culture. So one has to respect that. So yes, the Hong Kong people are quite, especially the older generation, they are quite connected with that type of belief. So they will read the astrology, you know, the yearly astrology, because China is a 12 animal circle. So this year is the year of the rat. So if you're a rat, you will read your astrology for the year, or if you're another sign, some will do also. It's part of their culture. So they, you know, in the West, we're a bit Cartesians. You know, we like to believe that science is key, which is right. But here they take science also, but they also integrate their local beliefs that are not scientific, but that's the way it is. So yeah, they're quite flexible with religion and belief. I think Chinese are not really religious; they are more spiritual. If you compare them with people from other other geographical areas like the Middle East or Europe and the States. Chinese are more, I would say, spiritual. Yeah.
Interesting. It might be that there's a difference between monotheism and
Mm.
but that's super interesting. I integrate everything I can. I integrate feng shui. I integrate astrology. I integrate
Mm.
the Fae folks. I was talking to my friend in Scotland, and we learned about the Fae folks. We learned about the ghosts and in our history lessons in school. When we were kids, it's part of the culture. So that's really interesting to know that it's still very, very deeply rooted in the culture. Do they have a lot of, because it doesn't seem so, but what's the immigration status? Like how much of it seems like it's actually pretty impossible to go to China or to go to Hong Kong and to make a life, to integrate society and find a job and come from another country and make a life there. What do you think? Because you're obviously doing it. How easy or difficult is it?
Well, currently the situation is a bit different from the past because of the COVID-19. But I've met lots of foreigners that came to China. Some have been there for many years, 20 years, 30 years. Of course, as a foreigner, unless you have Chinese origin, you're different. So it's not like in the States or in Europe where as a foreigner from a different background or color or face, you can integrate. In China, is probably more complex because they don't have a lot of foreigners. There's about less than 1 million foreigners in China out of a population of 1.4 billion. So you see, it's really a drop in the ocean, I would say. In Hong Kong, it's easier. Comparatively, there's more foreigners in Hong Kong per capita than in China. Because Hong Kong was a colony, a British colony for a while, so you had lots of British. Now most of them have left, and you also have lots of people coming from British colonies such as India, Pakistan, Nepal, and so on. There's still a community from these countries, but it's true that Hong Kong is by 95% Cantonese or Chinese. You can still go to China. Well, these days it's complicated, but I think once the COVID-19 pandemic is over, it's still possible to go to China to study or to work. But of course, it's quite different. I mean, from a Western perspective than going to, if you're in the USA or in France, going to work in Canada, Australia, or even some other countries in Europe or Latin America. It's still quite different, but
the language
yes,
barrier, the language is completely different.
The language is an issue. The writing is even more complex. Language is not that difficult. I mean, you need a bit of time to master it, but to get a smattering of Chinese is not that complicated because the grammar is very simple. The tones are quite difficult, but the grammar is very simple. So you can actually form simple sentences very easily compared with a lot of different languages. In that respect, Chinese is simple. But then if you want to make it more sophisticated, or that's tough, especially the tones. So you can, if you change the tone, then you change the meaning, and then it can completely lead to word plays at some point. So
talking about
it's a quite.
Are people there playful? Are they playful people, or are they more serious?
No, I think I really personally really like Chinese, uh, really like Chinese people. They're very nice, actually. They're very welcoming. They are very hospitable. I mean, I've been traveling to like 80 different countries. I think China is the place that where one of the places where I found highly hospitable people, even if you don't speak the language. Of course, if you do, it's even better. They're very welcoming. They're very curious. Curiosity for them, it's a positive thing, not a negative one versus some cultures. Um, very nice people, willing to learn, willing to play. They really enjoy, they have a collective mindset. So they really enjoy talking with different people. Of course, there's some area they will ask you lots of questions about your age, about your if you're married, like, and also how much you're making per month, because for them it's not a big secret. But talking about politics is a no-go zone. Criticizing China is not that welcome, because China was the most important civilization on earth until, let's say, the mid 19th century, where they got a beating from the Western powers and Japan. So they called that 100 years of humiliation. And that's why, when the Communist Party took power, it was easy for them to get together the Chinese, because they felt oppressed, and they were oppressed for about 100 years. So if you don't talk about politics, it's fine, unless you have very good friends, and then of course it takes time, but they can be more open-minded. But no, they are very, very nice people. I mean, of course, you always have bad people, everywhere you go, and every civilization. But Chinese people are quite nice, and they're willing to share, their world visions. They're willing to learn. That's very positive, and that goes throughout the generations. Like, for example, my father-in-law start to use WeChat, which is the equivalent of WhatsApp, but even better, when he was 80, and he's a poet. So actually, he wrote poets, and he sent his poems through this social applications to reach his friends. And so that's a good mix, of the old way of doing things, like writing poetries, and using the new technologies. So for them, technology is it's an interesting thing, no matter you're 7-year-old or 77. So quite very interesting people, actually.
Are they
knowing.
Are they one last question on the economy? I guess it's more economics and social economics. Are they worried about robotization of society, or are they embracing it?
I think they're more embracing it, but of course, you have a massive population that needs to be employed, because right. Chinese are afraid of chaos. So they want to avoid chaos at all costs. So they need to integrate robotization within the way the factories are operating, within the way they will develop their ability to work smart. I mean, they want to work smart, working hard. They've been working hard for ages. And now, especially the younger crowd, they want to work smart. Their value system for the young generation is very close to the value system of the same youth globally, where in the US, they were in USA, in Europe, or Japan, Korea, Singapore, whatever. So young people, they want to work smart. So of course, there's some conflicts between the generation. It is the case everywhere. So I think there's a lot of common grounds between the young generation these days. I think they all use TikTok or social medias, and of course, politically speaking, because they belong of some different political system. Though there's some oppositions, but for the rest, I think it's quite similar.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Eric, this has been incredible. Do you have anything you wish to share that we haven't talked about, or that, you know?
Well, what I will always say, you know, we Westerners, you know, I mean, we are um, we benefit from the Western conquerors of the planet. We need to learn more from the other civilization, the other culture. That's very important because they know more about us than we know about them. And I think if we can reach a better equilibrium or in terms of knowledge, that will help to yeah to smooth up the conversation between civilizations.
Yeah.
Basically, that's it. Yeah, we
What
need we all. Yeah.
do you think in the world we're going to, I mean, it feels like we're going towards a globalization, economic globalization, but
Mm.
um, I don't know. I love culture. I love uniqueness and languages and poetry and art and craft and music, and I find that these elements of culture have a tendency to be washed away by the globalization of social economics. You know what I mean? How do
Yeah, sure.
you? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think we should mix. We the USA or France, you know, they have this universal culture that they believe should be integrated within all the other people.
Mm.
But on the other side, you know, there's a tendency to be, of culturalism where, you know, the local culture is also very important. Um, I'm a proponent of mixing both approaches. I mean, we all universal because we're all men and women. You know, we may have a different color of skins, be different a color of hairs or height or whatever, but we're all human after all. So we're all made of flesh and blood. So that's the the basic elements of life, you know. Then of course we may have different system of thinking or different spirituality or religion, but we need to learn from each other. I mean, it's very important to especially for people doing global business, no matter the type of business. It could be art, could be music, could be finance, science, whatever, business, research. We need to learn from each other. It's the way to smooth up the relationship between people that stemming from different cultures. So I think cultural studies should be part of the curriculum.
Yes.
And learning, you know, from the others. You know, we are Westerners originally. We can learn from the African cultures, from the Asian cultures, from the Latin American cultures, and so on, the Middle East cultures. Because when you meet people, you know, they're always happy if you know something about their culture.
Yeah.
So that should be really important for the young generation and also for the older ones to be able to relate to their own to the history of people they're meeting. You know, when I worked in India, I did some recruitment of senior leaders in India. Before I was going to India, my first activities were to read books on India, to read novels written by Indian writers, to understand the Indian mindset. And that helped me to avoid misbehaviors, and also to strengthen the relationship with my Indian friends and my Indian candidates. So that's very important, you know, to in this kind of bilateral or global business, to be able to understand, you know, the history, the philosophy of your counterparts.
Mm. Terrific. you're a man of you're a man of many gifts and values, and I am honored that. First of all, I'm super excited that we got back together, connected through technology.
Yes.
I'm super excited. I can't wait to hopefully, inshallah, please God, maybe one day we will meet, and I will have the pleasure of saying hello to your wife and son, and hopefully soon you'll be able to see them all together again.
Sure,
as one
with
family.
pleasure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And en attendant, I thank you for doing this with me. I hope it serves and opens the minds of many that can travel, and that can be blessed by knowing that the person beside them, with you know, the faces of the countries that we mentioned, maybe they'll smile a bit more, and they'll greet each other and have tea together. Is tea really the main drink there, or do they? Is it just?
Yeah, tea is from China, but so of course they drink a lot of tea in different ways. Coffee is also picking up a lot, and depending on your surrounding. But for all in Hong Kong, they even have a drink which is mixing tea and coffee. Yeah, and it's not bad. Yeah, yeah. So you know, it's part of the fusion. You know, they take, you know, Chinese. They're very flexible. They mix different ingredients. They like it, they keep it. They don't like it, they change.
Nice, yeah. Nice. All right. Well, Eric, thank you again for joining me, and I will see you around the corner on another Astrid traveling. Right now, I'm waiting for my plane.
Okay. So you take care, Astrid, and talk soon.
Thank you. You too, Eric. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Namaste.
Bye.